My name is Sharon, and by profession, I am an architect. However, on this significant day, I found myself taking on the role of a bride, eagerly making my way down the aisle. I had put my heart and soul into organizing every aspect of our wedding, from the choice of flowers to the playlist that would provide our soundtrack for the evening. I envisioned our special day as if it were lifted from the pages of a romance novel, a testament to the power of love. Standing at the altar was Peter, my soon-to-be husband who works as an engineer. His approach to life is pragmatic and direct, perfectly balancing my creative instincts. I always felt that we were a great match, enhancing each other's strengths. The excitement of beginning a new chapter with him filled me with joy. However, as our gazes met, I couldn't help but notice a distant, burdened look in his eyes. I attributed it to wedding day jitters. Little did I know, I was mistaken. As I walked closer, I overheard Peter's mother, Julie, whispering to someone next to her. Her scrutinizing look made me uneasy, but she managed a strained smile and told me I looked beautiful, though her eyes told a different story. The ceremony moved forward, and when it was time for Peter to speak his vows, there was a heart-stopping pause before he managed to say, "I do." His voice lacked the warmth I had come to associate with his affection for me. During the ring exchange, Julie made it a point to take a photo, loudly stating the importance of capturing the moment. Her words, though seemingly innocent, felt more like a veiled warning than a celebration of our commitment. At the reception, Julie found me mingling with some college friends and commented on my wedding dress with a thinly veiled critique, praising its beauty yet highlighting its non-traditional nature. I responded with a lighthearted remark about celebrating love in our unique way. Before the conversation could go further, Peter stepped in, asking his mother to give us space. For a moment, I thought he was defending our choices, but his comment hinted at resignation rather than support. His words felt out of place on a day that was meant to be filled with nothing but happiness. I scanned the crowd, hoping to lock eyes with someone who might confirm that what I was experiencing was just typical wedding day chaos. Yet deep inside, I knew better. There was a palpable tension, an undeniable sense that something fundamental was amiss, and the red flags were too prominent to overlook any longer. As Peter and I stepped onto the dance floor for our first dance, the distance between us was more than just physical. Our movements were in sync, but emotionally, we were worlds apart. The song, intended as a celebration of our union, felt more like a cruel joke. When the music faded, Peter's attempt at reassurance only emphasized the void between us. "So, Mrs. Sharon, ready for forever?" he asked. The irony of his question weighed heavily on me. I wanted to voice my doubts, to question if all our tomorrows would be shadowed by the unease of today. Instead, I masked my concerns with a tentative affirmation, hoping against hope that the gloom would dissipate, and that this rocky beginning was not a foretaste of what was to come. I was unaware that this day would merely serve as the overture to a challenging period that would test not only the resilience of our marriage, but the essence of my identity. As we celebrated our union, the festive toasts felt hollow, overshadowed by a sense of loss. The journey back to my home, a charming 3-bedroom house that stood as a testament to my hard work and independence, marked the beginning of our shared life. This home was meant to be our haven, the foundation for our future together. Yet, it soon became the backdrop for a series of confrontations that felt more like an invasion than the start of marital bliss. Julie, living a mere quarter of an hour away, took to visiting uninvited with unsettling frequency. Her criticisms were relentless, targeting everything from my culinary skills to the decor of our home. Her complaints were varied but equally cutting, whether lamenting my tasteless cooking or the choice of bathroom tile color. Peter's attempts to intervene were tepid at best, often seeming more performative than protective. Julie's intrusions became a regular ordeal, each visit an opportunity to assert her dominance through thinly veiled insults and critiques. However, the real turning point came one afternoon when she arrived with suitcases in tow, her declaration of intent clear and her sense of entitlement palpable. This was not just another visit. It was an occupation, one that threatened to suffocate the life out of our nascent marriage. "I'm going to be living here now," she announced, breezing past me to place her luggage in my favorite cozy corner by the window, my sanctuary for reading and quiet moments. "This spot will be just perfect for me," Julie proclaimed with a finality that made my heart drop. I turned to Peter, my eyes wide with disbelief, silently begging him to intervene, to preserve the sanctity of our home. This was a decision we should have made together. Seizing a moment, I pulled Peter aside, my voice shaking. "This is our home. Shouldn't we have talked about this first?" His gaze met mine, void of the warmth and love that had once seemed so abundant. "Mom's getting older, Sharon. It's not right for her to be alone. She needs to be with family," he explained, stressing the word family in a way that made me feel excluded. "So, I'm not family? Is that it?" The words barely left my lips before the tears began to well up, a mix of hurt and frustration. Peter quickly countered, his patience thinning. "You know, that's not what I mean. But I owe her this. What about us? What about what we owe to each other? We're supposed to be building our life together, not living with your mom," I argued, but it was as if I was speaking to a wall. My concerns, my feelings, seemed inconsequential. And just like that, Julie's move into our home was decided, steamrolling over my wishes. With Julie's arrival, the dynamic of our home shifted drastically. Every corner of the house, once filled with our shared dreams and plans, now felt weighed down by tension and conflict. My once peaceful reading nook was overtaken by her belongings. The kitchen became a stage for her critiques, and Peter, the man I had married, seemed more like an ally to Julie than to me. It dawned on me that I was no longer just fighting to save my marriage or reclaim my space. I was fighting for my very sense of self, my dignity, and my peace. A persistent thought haunted me. How had things come to this point, where my desires, my space, and my voice were secondary to Julie's preferences? The transformation was stark. My beloved nook was now a monument to Julie's intrusion, the kitchen a battleground for her relentless criticism, and my husband had become a stranger, aligning himself with what felt like the opposition. And this was only the beginning. Life, already challenging, became an unbearable nightmare as the atmosphere in our home grew increasingly oppressive, symbolizing the shrinking of my own space and voice. To add to the mounting pressure, a discovery brought everything into sharper focus: the unmistakable presence of 2 blue lines on a pregnancy test, signaling a new life amidst the turmoil. This revelation intensified the situation, making the already dense atmosphere in the house almost suffocating, as I grappled with the realization that the stakes were now even higher. Clutching the pregnancy test, my hands shook with a mixture of anticipation and dread. I had always dreamt that discovering I was pregnant would be one of the happiest moments of my life, a time filled with excitement and celebration. However, standing alone in the bathroom, tears welling up in my eyes as I faced my reflection, I realized this milestone felt more like a heavy burden. When I shared the news with Peter, his reaction was disappointingly tepid. "Well, that's something," he muttered, quickly diverting the conversation to a renovation idea his mother had proposed. It became clear that Julie saw my pregnancy not just as news, but as her new project. She took it upon herself to oversee every aspect of it, from what I ate to where I would give birth, all under the guise of being helpful. Julie's interference quickly escalated into a form of control. She scrutinized everything I ate, casting judgmental glances at even the simplest of meals and questioning my weight management, despite my assurances that my diet was doctor-approved. "Doctors these days have no clue," she'd scoff dismissively, convinced that her dated wisdom surpassed modern medical advice. As the pregnancy progressed, Julie's demands grew more outrageous. She transformed my home into her domain, expecting me to maintain it to her standards, disregarding the fact that I was pregnant and needed rest. "Sharon, why isn't the living room clean yet?" she would demand from her spot in my once peaceful reading nook, now commandeered as her base for endless phone scrolling and TV watching. My protests of fatigue fell on deaf ears, with Julie insisting that pregnancy was no excuse for laziness. Peter's silence throughout these exchanges only added to the strain. His lack of support became painfully obvious, especially during a dinner that erupted into an argument over baby names. Julie's harsh criticism of my chosen name was the last straw. "Enough, Julie. This is my child, and I will decide how to raise them," I countered, my patience exhausted. Her reaction was one of indignation, as if my asserting some control over my own life was a personal affront. Peter's attempt at peacemaking, siding with his mother and labeling me as emotional, only deepened the chasm between us. I was left feeling more isolated than ever, trapped in a home that had become a battleground, where my voice seemed to matter less and less. This wasn't just about choosing a baby name anymore. It was about reclaiming my autonomy, my dignity, and the sense of belonging that had been systematically eroded by Julie's overbearing presence. Gazing into the reflection of my once shiny wedding ring, I hardly recognized the woman looking back at me. A woman who was gradually losing everything she held dear: her sanctuary, her self-respect, and most heartbreakingly, her determination to stand up for herself. It was during one of our tense confrontations that Julie, brimming with a vindictive sense of victory, delivered a blow that would alter everything. She coldly suggested that perhaps I didn't belong in their family if I couldn't navigate a simple family disagreement. Peter's response, or lack thereof, was perhaps the most painful part. His silence was louder and more hurtful than any words could ever be, making it painfully clear that my ordeal was not just beginning, it had been my reality for far too long. My days turned into a blur, moving through a house that no longer felt like mine, clinging to the only beacon of hope I had left the life growing inside me. Yet even this small comfort felt under siege in the toxic environment I found myself in. The breaking point came one frigid evening during yet another excruciating family dinner. Despite my efforts to prepare a flawless meal, Julie's criticisms were relentless, attacking everything from the food's seasoning to its preparation. Her words felt like physical blows, each comment a strike against my already wavering confidence. But it was her next jab that cut the deepest, questioning my capability as a mother based on my supposed inadequacy in managing household chores. Peter's agreement with her was the final blow, pushing me over the edge. Fueled by a mix of anger, accumulated resentment, and sheer desperation, I found my voice. Step it up? I've been carrying our child, taking care of our home, and enduring endless criticism from your mother. And you're telling me to step it up? The shock on their faces said it all, but I was past caring. For too long, I had allowed myself to be diminished and belittled. But in that moment, I reclaimed my voice. "I'm done. I can't do this anymore," I declared, the clarity of my decision piercing through the years of suppression. It was a declaration of my refusal to tolerate any more disrespect or emotional torment. I was ready to fight for myself, for my child, and for a future free from the shadows that had darkened my life. My voice broke as I spoke. I refuse to raise my child in a place where their mother is constantly belittled. If this is what being a family means to you, then I want no part in it. With those final words, I left the dinner table behind, their stunned silence echoing in my wake. Grabbing only the essentials, I made my way to the door, my hands trembling as I reached for the knob, eager to escape the suffocating atmosphere. Julie, ever the antagonist, chose that moment for her most cutting remark yet. "And where do you think you're going? This is Peter's house, not yours." I stopped and faced her, my resolve hardening. "Actually, Julie, this house is mine. I bought it. I decide who stays and who goes." Peter's voice broke through, tinged with desperation. "Sharon, please, let's discuss this." But I was beyond negotiation. "There's nothing left to discuss," I replied, my tears a testament to the pain of my decision. Stepping out into the cold night felt like stepping into a new chapter of my life, one filled with uncertainty, but also a sense of liberation. The door closing behind me signified the end of a tumultuous saga, a final farewell to a life I could no longer bear. I walked away, each step a mixture of pain and determination, propelled by the need to reclaim my autonomy. The journey to my parents' home was a blur of cold, fatigue, and heartache. Just a short distance from my haven, a misstep caused me to stumble and fall, the physical pain a mere echo of my inner turmoil. Yet this fall did not deter me. It only strengthened my resolve. Reaching my parents' doorstep, the concern in their eyes mirrored the gravity of my situation. As they ushered me to the hospital, I realized that this moment of vulnerability marked not just an end, but a beginning. Lying in the hospital bed with the reality of my circumstances setting in, I understood that returning to my previous life was not an option. This breaking point was a crucial step towards reclaiming the life and dignity that had been eroded away, a painful yet essential transition towards healing and independence. The clarity that comes with such moments is profound, revealing the path forward, away from the shadows of the past towards a future of my own making. Caught in a whirlwind of emotions, I stood surrounded by the comforting yet worried presence of my parents. Their concern was palpable, a silent testament to their fears about the true state of my marriage, now unmistakably revealed in its troubled depth. Breaking the heavy silence, my mom voiced her concern, her words heavy with the weight of the unfolding reality. "Sharon, love, what's your plan now?" "Unsure but resolute," I replied. "I'm not sure, Mom. But one thing's clear, I can't return to that life. Not now, not ever." My declaration, more confident than I anticipated, seemed to echo my newfound determination. My father, who'd been pacing anxiously, paused to reassure me, emphasizing that their support was unwavering regardless of my choice. He reminded me to consider not just my own future, but that of the life growing inside me. His words prompted a silent acknowledgement from me. My mind had been a battlefield of scenarios, each uncertain yet laced with the possibility of a fresh start. The unexpected buzz of my phone broke through my thoughts, a message from Peter, a plea for communication. But to me, his timing was a door long closed. His words, unseen, were left in the void as I turned off my phone, a symbolic end to our dialogue. My next steps were clear, marked by action rather than words. Reaching out to a family lawyer was my first decisive act towards ending the turmoil of my marriage. Supported by my parents, we navigated the cold legal breakdown of our union, discussing divorce, custody, and financial support. Despite the sterile nature of these discussions, they empowered me, marking the first steps of taking control over my destiny and ensuring the well-being of my unborn child. Within a week, Peter and Julie received the formal notices, divorce papers for Peter and an eviction notice for Julie from the home that was legally mine. Included were demands for a substantial child support and compensation for the emotional turmoil I had endured. Though drastic, these actions were necessary, severing the ties that had long bound me to a life of despair. When I finally re-engaged with my phone, it was flooded with Peter's attempts to reach out. His messages conveyed a mix of regret and a desire for reconciliation, but the scars left by nights of humiliation, years of neglect, and Julie's calculated malice, all silently condoned by Peter, were too deep. The brief temptation to hear him out was quickly overshadowed by the memory of the pain endured. This moment wasn't just about ending a chapter, it was about reclaiming my story, one where the shadows of the past no longer dictated the brightness of my future. The love I once felt for him had been completely overshadowed by the sorrow of our failed marriage. I took decisive steps to move on, deleting messages, removing his contact information, and blocking him across all social media. To me, Peter had become just a part of my history, a distressing chapter I was more than ready to conclude. Despite knowing the road ahead would be fraught with its own obstacles, divorce is complicated. Even more so with a child on the way, I was finally navigating my own life's direction, stepping out from the shadow that had enveloped me towards a future filled with hope. The day of the court proceedings, The room was filled with that distinct, sterile chill characteristic of spaces where fates are decided. My lawyer sat beside me, her posture exuding assurance, while my parents offered silent, steady support from behind. Across the aisle, Peter appeared lost, the reality of the situation dawning on him, while Julie's expression was one of shock and defiance. As the session began, the judge walked in, prompting everyone to rise. The process that followed was a flurry of legal jargon, with accusations and evidence laid bare. It was as if Julie and Peter were seeing their actions for the first time, not just through the legal lens, but mine as well. When it came to Julie's turn to speak, her usual confidence was absent. She attempted to justify her actions as concern for her son's welfare, but her explanation fell flat, especially under the judge's skeptical gaze. Judge Nina R. Morrison's verdict was clear and firm. I was granted a full divorce and sole custody of our unborn child. Peter was ordered to provide child support, and Julie, faced with a hefty fine for her emotional abuse and harassment, was visibly shaken. As the judge's gavel fell, a sense of liberation washed over me, though it was not without a tinge of sadness. My marriage had concluded not with dramatic confrontations, but through the quiet shuffling of papers and the firm voice of justice. This chapter of my life was closed, paving the way for a new beginning, free from the chains of the past. Gaining my freedom came at a price I'd never envisioned on the day I pledged my vows. As we exited the courtroom, Peter approached with a bewildered look, expressing his sorrow and disbelief at how our lives had unraveled. Looking into his eyes, I no longer saw my future, but rather a profound emptiness where love once resided. I never imagined this would be our end, Peter, but apologies can't undo what's been done, I told him, decisively turning away to leave the past behind. Julie sought my gaze, possibly hoping for a sign of forgiveness or recognition, but I couldn't afford her that closure. She had taken too much from me, and I refused to let her see how deeply she had affected my life. Stepping outside, the world seemed to embrace me anew, with the sun shining brighter and colors more vivid. It felt like I was viewing life with a fresh perspective, one not dimmed by the shadows of turmoil. My mother's embrace and words of pride brought tears to my eyes. "You're truly free now, Sharon," she said, her emotion evident. "I couldn't have faced this without you and Dad," I responded, feeling an immense gratitude for their unwavering support. That evening, in the solitude of my home now solely mine, I felt a deep tranquility. Alone, yet far from lonely, for the first time in a long stretch, I was free to live by my own standards. The path ahead as a single mother seemed daunting, yet as I felt my unborn child's subtle movements, confidence washed over me. We would manage, I was sure of it. The ordeal I had endured led me to this moment of self-discovery. While it left scars, they marked a tale of resilience, not defeat. Facing the future, I was not just compelled by circumstance, but driven by choice. This distinction filled me with a profound sense of empowerment. Ready for what lay ahead, not out of necessity, but from a place of deliberate decision. I knew this was the start of a meaningful new chapter.
My name is Julie. I currently work with my husband, Scott, at his family's small business. This business is managed by my father-in-law, Paul. It's a cozy place with about 5 employees. Paul doesn't get involved much in the daily work. Instead, Scott, who will soon take over as president, works hard. He looks for new clients and projects, showing his dedication to growing the business. When we have a big project, all the employees come together enthusiastically, creating a vibrant atmosphere. I have been working here for 12 years since I got married. Hey Julie, how long do you plan on clinging to our family business? My mother-in-law, Olivia, asked this as I came home early to make dinner, while Scott was still at the office. Olivia had retired from the business when Scott and I got married and seemed happy about her retirement. But now, with more free time, she often criticized me. "What do you mean by clinging?" I asked, trying to stay calm. Olivia sharply replied, "Exactly what it sounds like. You must have married Scott because you couldn't find a job anywhere else, and now you're just taking advantage of our company." I sighed to myself. These kinds of comments from her were becoming more common. When I married, I left my previous job and joined Scott's family business by choice, not because I was fired. For some reason, Olivia thought I was completely unskilled at my job. I said before that it's not that I couldn't work somewhere else. I chose to join Scott's company, I told her. But she answered dismissively, "I can see right through your real intentions." She thought she knew everything about me and walked back to the living room. However, the problems with my mother-in-law weren't just her words. She had quit her job promising to look after the house, but she never helped out. My father-in-law often asked her to do some chores since she was home all day, but she stubbornly refused, saying, "I've worked all my life, now it's the daughter-in-law's turn to do the housework." As a result, I usually ended up making dinner. Olivia seemed to make and eat her own lunch as she liked, but she never cleaned up afterward. Each day, as I returned for my errands, the sight of piled-up plates and utensils greeted me, stirring a mix of frustration and resignation within me. Gathering my courage, I decided to address this domestic issue one sunny afternoon. "Olivia," I began hesitantly, trying to sound as diplomatic as possible, "I've noticed the dishes often get left in the sink. It would be really helpful if you could tidy up after your meals. It's just a small request, but it would mean a lot to me." To my dismay, Olivia's response was far from understanding. Her eyes flashed with anger as she snapped, "Are you trying to give me orders in my own house? You're just a daughter-in-law. How dare you dictate what I should do?" Her sharp and unyielding words reminded me of the delicate balance in our family dynamics. "I wish Helen were here instead of you," Olivia continued, her voice laced with a mix of longing and bitterness. Helen, Scott's younger sister and my sister-in-law, was a spirited and ambitious woman. Our encounters had been limited to brief formal meetings, and she was notably absent from our wedding, having canceled at the last minute. I later learned from Scott that she had overindulged with friends the night before and was nursing a hangover, unable to attend. Despite this, Helen pursued her dreams fiercely, relocating to Jersey after her college graduation to dive into the bustling world of fashion design. In an attempt to change the subject, I mentioned Helen's hard work and dedication. "Helen's really making a name for herself in Jersey, working hard in her field," I said, hoping to ease the tension. However, Olivia's views on Jersey were negative. Jersey, that cold, impersonal city. It's no place for someone as warm-hearted as Helen. "And you're from Jersey too, aren't you? Now it all makes sense. You're always so distant towards me." Caught in this tiring conversation, I realized that if I didn't start preparing dinner soon, we'd be eating much later than usual. While dealing with my own frustrations, I managed to stay calm. "Mom, let's continue this conversation later. I need to focus on getting dinner ready, or we'll be eating quite late tonight." With some reluctance, Olivia finally went back to the living room, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the noise of the cooking utensils. Paul and Scott were both aware of Olivia's mistreatment towards me as a daughter-in-law and tried to intervene whenever they saw it happening. However, their efforts seemed to have little effect. Each time they confronted the situation, their faces showed concern and frustration, showing their desire to create harmony in our family. Ironically, whenever Paul and Scott scolded Olivia for her behavior, she took out her anger on me, becoming even more hostile and sharp with her words. Her face, usually kind and gentle, became twisted with disdain, her tone cutting deeper than before. Although I had never been physically hurt, the emotional impact of Olivia's words was significant. Paul and Scott's support had been my comfort, helping me somewhat ignore Olivia's harsh words until then. One morning, just after I had finished cleaning up from breakfast and was preparing to leave for work, something unimaginable happened. In the midst of the morning rush, as I was hurrying, Olivia suddenly exclaimed, "Oh my, what a mess!" And without warning, she poured a bucket of water over my handbag. I was stunned, a mix of shock and anger making me speechless. "What are you doing, Olivia?" I managed to ask, my voice trembling with disbelief. Olivia's response was dismissive, her tone like that of a mischievous child. "Oh, was that your stuff?" "I thought it was just a big piece of trash," she said dismissively, which made me even angrier. "Even if you thought it was trash, who pours water on it? What kind of thinking is that? Now the carpet is all wet. Why would you do something like this?" I was really upset as I quickly took the wet things out of my bag, including important work documents, and laid them on the table. Olivia looked calm and didn't seem sorry or worried about how upset I was. "Because you don't need to go to work anymore," she said coolly. I was shocked. In our living room, filled with morning light, I sat across from Olivia. Her face was colder and more determined than usual. It was as if she had made a decision that would change everything. "Excuse me," I said, confused and surprised. "You've been in this house for 12 years, but now I can finally get rid of you," she declared. Her words hurt me deeply, and her voice had a level of anger and determination I had never heard before. My mind spun and my heart ached. "Getting rid of me?" I asked, unable to believe what I was hearing. Her words made me feel like an outsider in this family. "Actually, my daughter is joining the company, so we need you to leave. Today's your last day. All you have to do is bow your head to your father-in-law and Scott, apologizing for all the trouble you've caused," she said with a mocking laugh. She was using my job to push me out. I had spent years at that job, earning respect and making memories. I was shocked and hurt. My devotion to this family seemed to mean nothing to her. It horrified me not just that she acted this way, but that after 12 years of hard work, she could ask me to leave so her daughter could take my place. It felt like my years of effort were being disregarded. "Really? Are you sure about this? Wasn't Helen working in a clothing store in Jersey?" I asked, reflecting my confusion and worry. My job was more than just a paycheck. It was my way of fulfilling myself. Meanwhile, Helen, my sister-in-law, seemed to have grown tired of city life and decided to come back to the family. She said she was tired of the unfriendly people in Jersey, so I told her if she came back home, I'd have a job ready for her. She agreed to return immediately. "Now that she's coming back, I want you out of this house," she told me. I couldn't believe her words. She was ready to turn my life upside down with just one decision, completely ignoring my role in the family and not even listening to me. She handed me an envelope, saying, "I've written your resignation letter," and just like that, she kicked me out. My heart broke. Everything I had built over the years seemed worthless, treated like just a piece of paper. Her actions deeply hurt our family bond. I walked to the company, just a quick 5-minute walk from my house. As I walked under the cool morning sky, each step was heavy with the weight of what was happening. When I told my father-in-law, Paul, and my husband, Scott, about what my mother-in-law had said, they were shocked but stayed calm. They suggested that maybe it was time for me to resign to show her the reality of the situation. This idea upset me deeply. I had worked hard in our family business for years and barely knew what a long vacation was like, aside from short breaks during Thanksgiving and the holiday season. Encouraged by Scott and Paul's kind words, "Why don't you spread your wings for a change?" I decided to go on a little trip. As I packed, I thought a lot about my life, my choices, and what was ahead. Meanwhile, my sister-in-law Helen, who was supposed to replace me at the company, shockingly didn't show up until 3:00 p.m. Her lack of responsibility disappointed Scott and Paul, who had been managing without me. Helen seemed not interested in learning the work despite their efforts to teach her. Hearing this made me worry about the future of our company, even as I looked forward to my trip. Leaving without seeing my mother-in-law, I quickly started my journey. During the trip, as I enjoyed the view from the train, I reflected on my life past, present, and future, and savored local seafood delicacies. I thought deeply about myself, my family, and our business. But on the 5 days of my trip, the peace was broken when Helen called me crying. "What's going on?" I asked. "Mom said it was an easy job, just sitting in a chair, but Scott and Dad are acting like I can't do anything right," she said. Her words, likely influenced by my mother-in-law, surprised me even as I was enjoying my break. I decided it was time to address the situation. "So Helen, how good are you with computers?" I asked her. Hesitantly, she replied, "Well, I usually watch videos online, and I play games too." This question was to see if Helen could adjust to a new job. Having worked in a clothing store in Jersey for a while, her computer skills seemed basic. "Do you know how to use Word or Excel?" I asked. Helen looked confused, showing she wasn't familiar with these tools in a professional setting. Even in clothing stores, tasks like managing sales data in Excel or recording customer info in Word are common. "Have you ever worked with image editing, video editing, or audio editing software? Do you have any experience with such tools?" I asked. Helen, clearly puzzled, replied, "What's all that?" This question aimed to dig deeper into her technical skills to better understand her capabilities. Considering her background in the apparel industry, it's unlikely she never used a computer. Tasks like tracking sales, managing inventory, and inputting customer data would have required her to use Excel. When asked if she can handle calculations for sales or fill in documents, she confidently said, "I can do that." However, when I asked if she could also calculate tax, her confidence faded, and she answered uncertainly, This question tested her math skills and her ability to use them in a business context. While Helen might have other skills, it was clear she was insecure about the necessary skills for the job. Her discomfort seemed mainly due to her struggle with calculations, which could explain why she faced criticism from Paul and Scott. First and foremost, I needed to show my mother-in-law and those who tried to push me out that they were mistaken. "Since you're taking over my job," I began. I told Helen that she needed to handle the accounting tasks well and remember to be professional in her emails, because a casual tone that might be fine with friends doesn't work for business. She would also be in charge of scheduling the staff shifts. Even though our team is small, we carefully consider everyone's time off requests, so she shouldn't just think about what's convenient for her. As I listed these expectations, I could hear her sobbing on the other end of the phone. But I was told I wouldn't have to do anything. Why are there so many tasks? "I didn't come back home for this," she said, and then abruptly ended the call. Over the next 4 days, I decided to enjoy sightseeing in Jersey, the place Helen had left. My time there showed me that not everyone in Jersey is unfriendly actually. Finding someone as cold-hearted as my mother-in-law and Helen seemed rare. A week after I left my job, I returned to my in-laws' house. When I arrived, Olivia, looking very upset, confronted me angrily. How dare you make my daughter cry? You won't get away with this," she yelled, her eyes full of anger and misunderstanding. She tried to grab me, but Scott and Paul quickly stepped in to calm her down, though her anger didn't seem to lessen. Scott sighed deeply before saying, "Helen is upset because she was scolded for trying to boss her employees around despite not being able to do the job right. It's not Julie's fault. Besides, Julie hasn't been here for a week, so she couldn't have upset Helen. Mom, you really need to stop these groundless accusations." But Olivia kept blaming me. "It's because of her. This woman is the reason for Helen's trouble," she claimed, her voice emotional and filled with baseless suspicions. "Where is Helen, by the way?" I asked, looking around the living room, but Helen was nowhere to be seen. Her absence added more confusion to an already puzzling situation. While it didn't matter to me that Olivia was upset about Helen, I knew Helen didn't have many options since she had ended her lease at her apartment in Jersey. I thought Helen would be at her parents' house, but she wasn't there, which made me wonder. Helen's locked herself in her room. She's been crying and saying she doesn't want to go to work anymore, Scott explained. It seemed like Helen had avoided learning the job properly. It was understandable though, because she didn't have the skills needed to replace me. You've been turning Scott and Paul against me, haven't you? Otherwise, they wouldn't say the company ran better with you than with Helen, who can't do the job. Olivia accused me sharply. Her words were filled with long-standing misunderstandings and prejudices, leaving me completely baffled. She seemed to have always seen me as an opponent, her words reflecting years of wrong ideas. Scott let out a heavy sigh, his face showing his tiredness and frustration with the complicated emotions in our family. He had tried many times to clear up the misunderstandings among family members, but it didn't seem to work very well. Mom, I know it might sound odd coming from me, but Julie is truly exceptional at her work. She's certified in bookkeeping and her secretarial skills are top-notch. Moreover, she's studied Spanish and even has experience studying abroad. When it comes to dealing with multiple languages at our company, Julie handles everything, Scott said with a sense of pride. His mother, Olivia, looked very surprised. She had assumed that I quit my job as soon as I joined the family, so she had no idea about my contributions and achievements at work. What? That sounds like something straight out of a TV drama, I thought, recalling my college days. I was so focused on getting various certifications that I immersed myself in my studies, so much that I barely had time for clubs or a romantic relationship. It was during this busy time that I met Scott, who came to my company for business. As I found myself sharing the story of how Scott and I first met, I realized that this wasn't what Olivia wanted to hear, so I quickly got back to the main point. In short, I was responsible for a lot of tasks at the company, from handling accounting to scheduling, working with other companies, and managing employee shifts. Thanks to that, I could reach out to other businesses for deals, making the work environment much more comfortable than when Olivia was around. Scott added this, leaving Olivia speechless in amazement. Just then, Paul, Scott's father, made a comment that surprised me. We're going to shut down the company soon, actually. Helen made a big mistake. Even though she was supposed to prepare some documents, she decided to handle phone calls because it seemed more fun. While Scott and I were away, she ended up being rude to the person in charge from another company. Of course, I got a call to confirm this. Hearing this, I was so shocked that I instinctively covered my mouth with my hand. I can't believe Helen would do something like that, I murmured, filled with disbelief. The thought that Helen's actions might lead to the downfall of our company went through my mind, filling me with dread. However, as I was lost in these anxious thoughts, the story took an unexpected turn. When I explained the situation, they suggested it might be time to end the family business. We had mentioned this to you before, right? About being absorbed by another company, they said. Then, the president of company stepped forward, saying he was interested if Julie and I were involved. This was an unexpected but long hoped for development. Running a family business has its limits, and it's uncertain whether we could consistently attract stable customers. That's why Scott had always worked hard in sales, trying to secure new clients. Being absorbed by a larger company could mean having a steady base of customers. The future, once uncertain, suddenly seemed to have a bit of hope. However, this news only brought relief to me, Scott, and his father. Scott's mother suddenly opposed the idea, saying, "That's not acceptable. Scott must become the president. This company is ours, isn't it?" I was surprised by this sudden change. It seemed that more than a stable future, Olivia was concerned about maintaining the prestige of being part of a company president's family. And you're telling me he's not going to be the president anymore? Absolutely not acceptable, Olivia exclaimed passionately. This commotion caught the interest of Helen, who was upstairs in her room, leading her to come down to the living room to see what was happening. In response to the chaos started by Olivia, Paul spoke up calmly but firmly. "I am divorcing you, so either way, you will no longer be part of this executive family. Not only have you not changed your attitude towards my son's wife, but you also neglect household chores. To top it off, you spend your days out with young men instead of being home. I have no intention of supporting such a wife any longer." This was news to both me and Scott. We were so shocked that we could only stare at Paul with wide eyes. It seemed he had planned to discuss divorce from the beginning, as he took out divorce papers and a photo of Olivia with a young man from the living room shelf, placing them on the table. "If you sign the divorce papers now and leave with your belongings, I won't ask for alimony. I know getting any money from you would be pointless anyway," Paul said. "So unfair. How can you say that? Haven't I been devoted to this house all these years?" Olivia protested. "Devoted to this house? Have you done any real housework in the last 12 years? Does spending someone else's money on young men count as devotion to the house?" Paul countered. It was the first time we saw him this angry. Seeing this, Helen, who had come down to the living room, was visibly shaking from shock. "Helen, you're part of this too. You came back home because you couldn't make it in Jersey, and now you can't find a job, but still act superior. In the end, you stopped working entirely. Who did you inherit this escapism from? It's time for you to leave this house too," he continued. Next, we saw Helen's shock and resistance. She believed she was an important member of the family, but the reality was different. "Wait a minute, Dad. Mom might be a lost cause, but I'm your precious daughter, right?" she said. The family conflict deepened as Helen tried to assert her place, revealing her betrayal towards her mother. "Helen, are you betraying me now?" Olivia exclaimed, feeling betrayed by her daughter at the last moment. However, as the two started to argue loudly, Paul sternly silenced them with a shout. "If I just kick you out, it'll cause trouble for everyone, so I've asked an acquaintance to take you in. They'll be here soon to pick you up. Get your minimum belongings ready." Left with no choice, Olivia and Helen began packing their belongings. Then, an acquaintance of Paul arrived to take Olivia and Helen away. The person who came to pick them up was running a factory with dormitories, and it seemed they would be working there. Meanwhile, Scott, Paul, and I talked to the employees about the company being absorbed and prepared for the busy days ahead for our future. Finally, I found out I was pregnant. When I told the president of Company A, he was delighted and promised to send someone to replace me, which was a huge relief. Currently, Scott and Paul are working even harder for the sake of our upcoming child. "I'm sorry, but we have already left. While I was in the bathroom at the rest stop, I got a call from Larry. I was curious about what he wanted at such a time. When I answered the call, I heard Larry and his in-laws laughing loudly. 'What's going on?' I asked. He told me something shocking. 'We're going to have fun with the family. You can go back home and clean or something.' I had been really looking forward to this trip because it had been a long time since our last one. Even though I had doubts about traveling with his family, I was excited to stay at a fancy inn. I can't believe he left me alone at a rest stop. Standing inside the bathroom stall, I felt deeply betrayed and shook with anger. Still, I managed to say okay quietly. It's unforgivable. Today was not only our wedding anniversary but also my birthday, and we came on this trip for that. I'll make him regret this. My name is Linda Harrison. I'm a 36-year-old housewife. I don't have any children and live with my husband, Larry. We got married exactly 1 year ago on my birthday. Larry is romantic and has always made a big deal of our anniversaries and birthdays. Growing up, he was treated to fancy dinners, trips abroad, and cruises for his birthdays. It seems those childhood memories have stayed with him because he loves celebrating special days in a big way. Now that we're married, Larry's family is wealthy. His father is the CEO of Harrison Securities. My mother-in-law has fully embraced the wealthy lifestyle, and Larry, as the heir to the company, sometimes acts a bit spoiled. but I married him because I knew he cherished me. We met at a matchmaking agency where men from wealthy families like Larry were popular. I almost gave up on finding someone there. When I met him, I was lucky because I seemed to be his type, which led to our marriage. It might have helped that I wasn't just looking for someone rich. I had always dreamed of getting married, and I was thrilled when it happened. But I didn't know that after getting married, my life would start to get tough. A year ago, Larry and I started our married life in a one-bedroom apartment in the city. Larry wanted a bigger house, but I didn't think it was necessary since it was just the two of us. I suggested we live within our means for now, and we could always move later. Even though we were in the city, our rent was expensive at $2,300. As a housewife, this made me feel guilty. "Don't worry about it, my dad will handle it," Larry said. Although he was the heir and worked at Harrison Securities, I thought there should be some fairness with other employees. I wondered if it was really okay. But the next month, his salary went up by $800. "Your dad's amazing to be able to increase your salary just like that," I said. "It was time for a raise anyway. I won't let you face any hardships, Linda. Count on me," Larry replied. Even though Larry relied on his father's influence for money, I felt thankful for the raise and didn't argue. "By the way, I'm having dinner with my parents tonight," he added suddenly. "Is it like a business dinner?" "No, just a family dinner. I think I'll be back by 12. Take care." I was surprised. Even after marrying me, Larry casually mentioned having dinner with his parents on a regular evening. Caught off guard, I watched him say he should get going and then leave the house. Dinner on a weekday? Well, today is Friday after all. I hadn't heard about Larry planning to have dinner with his in-laws. Usually, as his wife, I'd be invited too. Not that I wanted a free meal, but it's important to build a good relationship with one's in-laws. I couldn't understand Larry's actions and started feeling unsure about our married life. After that dinner incident, Larry often went to his parents' house for reasons like, "It's my cousin's birthday," or "Mom asked me to come over." As a first-time bride, I just agreed, thinking this was normal. But when I had dinner with a friend one day and Larry was absent, she was surprised. "He goes home that often and leaves you alone for a cousin's birthday." "That's crazy," she said. She had been married for 6 years and knew more about married life than I did. Realizing that her reaction was normal, I felt embarrassed. "You're right, it's weird, but Larry says it's normal." "Seriously, don't take this the wrong way, but hasn't he really grown up yet?" she commented. Her words made me think. It's unusual for a 38-year-old, even one set to take over his dad's business, to prioritize family matters so much after getting married. I regretted not seeing Larry's true nature before marrying him. Returning home after dinner with my friend, I felt sad. "I'm home, Linda. Where have you been? Isn't it normal for a wife to cook dinner and wait for her husband, Mrs. Harrison?" To my surprise, my mother-in-law was in the living room. Larry was out, maybe at a convenience store. "Why are you here? Weren't you and Larry supposed to dine out tonight?" I asked. "That got canceled because of some issue at the restaurant. I thought Larry had messaged you just a bit ago." "Didn't you check?" she pointed out. I checked my phone and indeed, 22 minutes ago, Larry had messaged that he'd be home early, but I had just gotten off the train. There was no way I could have gotten home and started dinner so quickly. Yes, he did message, but I only saw it just now. What the heck? This is the problem with kids from single-parent households. You can tell they weren't raised right, my mother-in-law said harshly. Her words hurt me deeply. Indeed, I was raised by a single mother after my mom gave birth to me, and my father passed away due to an illness. Despite that, my mother raised me with a lot of love. I wished she wouldn't say things that put down my mother's hard work. It has nothing to do with being raised by a single parent. I just hadn't seen the message yet. I replied, clearly annoyed, but she ignored my comment and changed the subject. "Well, anyway, I've always thought this, but your house is quite small." I think it's average. It's just right for the two of us." You can't be serious. I feel sorry for Larry living in such a cramped space. My interactions with my mother-in-law continued to stress me out. Both my mother-in-law and father-in-law, maybe because they are wealthy, often seem to look down on others. That's why I never got along with them. Realizing that further conversation was pointless, I silently started to make dinner. Ignoring me, she turned on the TV. From that day, she started coming over unexpectedly more often, and even my father-in-law came a few times. Mostly, they complained about how dirty the kitchen was or how small the house felt. Eventually, they would sarcastically suggest, "You know we have a bigger house. Why not move in?" I definitely didn't want that and declined every time. They always visited when Larry wasn't home, so he didn't hear their rude remarks. I once talked to him about it, but he replied, "Why not? Why is living together a bad idea?" I was upset by his response. From then on, I realized there was no point in discussing it with Larry, and I just put up with it on my own. Soon we would be celebrating our first wedding anniversary, which was also my birthday. For your birthday this weekend, I'm thinking of celebrating bigger than last year. After all, it's also our anniversary, Larry said, coming home tipsy from work. Seeing his flushed face, I wasn't sure he meant it. Knowing he liked big celebrations, I felt a bit excited. "Last year, you treated me to a delicious dinner, which was more than enough. That's nothing compared to what I've planned. Let's go on a family trip." A family trip? The term sounded odd just for the two of us. Noticing my confusion, Larry continued, "My parents, cousins, Uncle Scenes, and all will join. We're heading to a luxury resort in Oceanside." All those people? And why Oceanside? Do you have a problem with a family trip, or is it Oceanside you're not keen on? No, it's not that, honestly. I couldn't understand why my birthday and our anniversary had to involve Larry's family, who weren't part of these occasions. I knew Larry was a bit out of touch, but I didn't expect such a strange idea. Although the choice of Oceanside confused me a little, it wasn't a big deal. "Sounds fun, right, Linda? Sometimes you've got to let loose and have fun," Larry said, a bit drunk, as he grabbed my shoulders. I found myself agreeing with him. Over the next week, I couldn't stop thinking about the trip. At first, I was unsure about going with his whole family, but as Larry said, it was a rare vacation, and I decided to make the most of it. As I prepared for the trip, I started to feel excited, and I found myself genuinely smiling. I knew my in-laws would probably make their usual rude remarks, but I decided to ignore them completely. Finally, the awaited Saturday came, and Larry and I went to his parents' house, our meeting point for the trip. "Well, Linda, you're late, aren't you? Do you even realize you're the star today?" my mother-in-law said sharply in front of everyone. But knowing I was supposed to be the focus helped soften her words a little. "I'm sorry, there was traffic," I replied. "Excuses won't do. We should leave soon. Otherwise, we'll be late to our luxury resort." All right, let's get going," I said. Despite their complaints about us being late, it was bearable. After all, they had been making such comments all year. Larry's cousin, who looked much younger than him and had a mean look in his eyes, made me wonder if everyone in the family was mean-spirited. My worry seemed justified when he made a demeaning remark. "This is Larry's wife?" Not what I expected. I looked away from him, figuring that reacting would only encourage them to criticize me more. I decided to act maturely. "I'm so excited. I've been to luxury resorts many times, but tonight's place costs $2,000 per person," I heard someone say. Hearing the price of $22,000 shocked me, and a sudden thought crossed my mind. I got into my in-laws' car, and as soon as my father-in-law started the car, we began moving. The drive to our destination in Oceanside would take about 3 hours. About an hour into our journey, we decided to take a short break at the next rest stop. "I'll be right back, heading to the restroom," I said. "All right, off you go," my mother-in-law waved dismissively, almost like shooing away a stray dog. I walked to the rest stop bathroom, feeling as if everyone's eyes were on me, or maybe it was just my imagination. Inside the bathroom stall, I took a deep breath, relieved that the trip had been uneventful so far. I hoped the rest of our journey would be just as smooth. Just as I was settling into that thought, my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was Larry calling. Expecting him to ask me to pick something up, I answered casually, "I'm still in the restroom, Larry." With what sounded like amusement, he replied, accompanied by the laughter of my mother-in-law, "Sorry, but we've already left." There was a moment of stunned silence on my end while laughter echoed from their side. "What do you mean?" I asked. Larry replied, "We're going to have fun with our family. You should just go home and clean, Linda dear. Today's trip is just for the Harrison family. It's a pity, but you'll have to stay behind. Goodbye." I was stunned. I had been looking forward to this trip for a long time. Having his family join us was a bit concerning, but I was excited about staying at a luxury hotel. And now they had left me alone at the rest area. I was shaking inside the restroom stall, feeling completely betrayed. Trying to keep my anger in check, I simply replied with a quiet "okay." This was unforgivable. Today was both our wedding anniversary and my birthday, and they had brought me on this trip. I was determined to make them regret this. After leaving the restroom, I called someone. The person on the other end was shocked and shared some surprising news. "Really?" I asked. "Yes," they answered. Then they promised to come and pick me up. Being left alone at the rest area like this was unbearable. I prayed for a quick rescue. An hour later, my Uncle Scene arrived in his car to pick me up. "I'm so sorry to trouble you like this," I said. "It's okay, it's quite an unfortunate situation," he replied. "Yes, they're headed to a luxury hotel in Oceanside," I mentioned. My Uncle Scene thought for a moment, then seemed to realize something. "I think that's the case," I replied. "I'm really sorry, but can you please take me there? I'll take the train back." "Got it, the drive there is nice anyway," my Uncle Scene agreed happily. About an hour later, we arrived in Oceanside. Larry and the others had come here before us. In front of us was a luxurious inn with a grand gate, a well-known high-end hotel, the only luxury accommodation I knew of that costs $2,000 a night. At the reception, I was told, "Dinner starts at 6:00 p.m. Please follow me." The person who greeted me with a smile was my mother. "Linda, it's been a while," she said. Dressed in an elegant outfit and smiling gracefully in a way that might seem formal to others, it was unmistakably my mother. This inn has been run by my mother's family for many years, and she currently holds the position of the innkeeper. After becoming a single mother, she began working at this inn. So to me, this place feels like home. I had called my mother from the rest area and was surprised to learn that there was a reservation today from Harrison Securities. I suspected they were going to a luxury hotel in Oceanside, but I never imagined they would be coming to the inn my mother runs. Of course, the family doesn't know that my mother manages this inn. "What a terrible story, Linda. You can't just let this slide," my mom said. "Yeah, I know. That's why I came here," I replied. "Let's get you changed over here," she suggested as I prepared to greet them at the dinner table. An hour later, at 7:00 p.m., my in-law family gathered for dinner. I stayed in the next room to remain unnoticed, slightly opening the door to observe inside. The spa was amazing. I'd want to come here every day if I could. If it were closer, we could indeed come every day, one of them said. At the very least, if you become the CDO, we could afford to come here anytime, another added. Really, I'm looking forward to that. I mean, the subordinates handle all the work anyway. I want to become a CEO soon too, Larry added, thinking they were just among themselves, making some rather crude remarks. But when my mother appeared from the other side of the door and greeted them, the room went silent. "Today, I will be in charge of serving you. Please let me know if you need anything," my mom said, bowing with perfect grace. There was a tangible tension among the family. However, when the food was served, they resumed their inappropriate discussions. Both my mother and I did nothing, simply watching as the plates emptied before them. It's great that we all could come. We got rid of the bothersome daughter-in-law, and the food is delicious. Perfect, one remarked. If you say that, she might get angry, another cautioned. It's fine, she's not really one of us. To be honest, she never was. After all, it would be a shame to have a child from a single-parent family in our household, my mother-in-law said harshly. Hearing her mother-in-law's harsh words, my frustration boiled to an almost uncontrollable point. At that very moment, my mother entered the room with a dessert plate loaded with cake and fruit. Today, I've heard it's Miss Linda's birthday and also her wedding anniversary with her husband. When my mother asked where to place the cake for Miss Linda, the family looked at each other, confused. Nobody told you that, they mumbled. Excuse me, I'm the innkeeper, and I've clearly heard about it. Did Larry call? I didn't tell anyone, Larry muttered. There was an awkward silence, and the in-laws exchanged nervous glances. Finally, the mother-in-law raised her hand. I am Linda, she said, embarrassed. I was too embarrassed to mention it at my age, but thank you all for the surprise. Given that the only woman in the room was the mother-in-law, her reaction seemed appropriate. However, my mother just gave a faint smile, seeing her act. Hey, what's so funny? Is it strange to be surprised at my age? The mother-in-law asked. No, not at all. I wasn't thinking that, my mother replied. Then just bring the cake already, the mother-in-law demanded. Yes, but before that, there's something I'd like to share, my mother said calmly. I took a deep breath. Linda Harrison is my daughter. Everyone in the room looked shocked and raised their voices in surprise. Seeing an opportunity, I quickly opened the door from the adjacent room and stood next to my mother. Welcome, this innkeeper is my mother. It's a pleasure to meet you, I said. Larry exclaimed, Linda, why are you here? And what do you mean she's your mother? It means exactly that. This inn belongs to my family, and I also intend to take over this place someday, I explained. In truth, Larry had never met my mother before. Part of it was because my mother was busy with the inn, and Larry and his parents also insisted on not meeting her face to face. Larry had called me for our wedding introduction, but he never met her in person. I showed my mother a picture of Larry and explained who he was. It was an unconventional introduction, but I believed my mother had accepted him. From your earlier conversations, could you please refrain from mocking and belittling my mother for being a single parent? I asked. We just stated the facts, they replied. What's with the sudden drama? What grudge do you have against us? They continued. Neither Larry nor his mother nor anyone else seemed to realize the extent of the disrespect they had shown me. I was exasperated. I let out all the anger I had been holding back. If I have any grudges, it starts with you, Larry. I thought you were a good person when we got married, but it turns out you're too attached to your mom. You married me, so you should put me first, right? Don't team up with your parents to make fun of me. Larry was speechless, unable to argue against my points. My mother listened quietly to my outburst. Turning to my in-laws, I asked, why do you treat me this way? If I'm such a nuisance, I can leave the Harrison family right now. You'll become a lonely, poor single woman, yeah? Are you sure about being alone? Both the mother-in-law and Larry sneered. Looking between my mother and me, I stared back firmly. It's okay, actually. I'm pregnant, so I won't be lonely. And if I inherit this inn, I won't have any financial worries. The truth was, I found out I was pregnant last week and hadn't told Larry yet. Only my mother knew, which is why she wasn't surprised. A child? What are you talking about? I haven't heard about this, Larry said, confused. Wait, Linda, if that's the case, it changes things. You should have told us sooner. Upon learning I was pregnant, the family immediately changed their attitude. I couldn't stand their unreliable and unreasonable behavior any longer and shouted again, no, my decision is final. Let's proceed with the divorce through lawyers. I will live happily with my child and my mother." Saying this, I opened the door to the hall they were in and left. The door slammed shut loudly. "I'm done with this. My child will be happier without that family." Whether they tried to change my mind or not, I received over 45 calls a day from Larry and his parents. Eventually, I blocked all their numbers. A few days later, I received a letter from Larry informing me of our official divorce. The letter expressed his regret and pleaded for me to return, but I ignored it and tore it up. I thought he might neglect our child just like he prioritized his parents over me, and I absolutely didn't want that. Being alone and lonely will be your fate, not mine, I thought. He should enjoy his bachelor life. Currently, I am nurturing my child in my womb and discussing future plans with my mother. Once the child is born and grows a bit, I plan to send them to daycare and join the hen's business. The path to becoming the next innkeeper is long, but I'm determined to work hard to raise my child properly. Yeah, I've got it made, marrying into money. You can keep struggling in your poor life, James said with a sneer and a smirk. He threw these mean words at me just as I was relaxing in the hotel lobby. James's loud voice made me feel bad. I wondered where he had met his new wife, who happened to be the daughter of the president of Richard Enterprises. James seemed proud and childish to me, laughing like a middle-aged man. When I heard Richard Enterprises, it sounded familiar. I remembered details about the company and smiled. Meanwhile, James was happy, but I struggled to hold back a laugh. My name is Linda, and I'm 37 years old. I live with my husband James. I work in my family's real estate business, mostly doing administrative tasks. My father is the president and manages the key strategies. Since I'm an only child, I'm expected to take over the company one day. I feel the pressure of becoming the president, but I've been careful not to talk too much about our family business with James. James only finished high school and works in a moving company. He feels inferior because of this, even though moving heavy items requires skill and strength. I respect his work, but I avoid mentioning my prestigious university degree or my future role as president when we talk. James and I met through a friend in college. She hired James's moving company and he helped with her move. Initially, James was interested in my friend. How we met was kind of funny. James was interested in someone else, but she was already in a relationship. They got along well, so she introduced him to me. I was looking for a partner at the time. Our meeting was unexpected, but it turned out great. James's carefree nature matched my meticulous personality. After going on several dates, we became a couple when I was in my late 20s, a good age for marriage. Within a year, we were married. My life as James's wife began without any problems. His parents were very kind and always welcomed me with smiles when we visited. Considering the issues my friends had with their mothers-in-law, I felt lucky to have such a good relationship with mine. However, James's job was demanding, and he often worked late, which was tiring for him. Despite being tired, he never neglected our marriage. I felt grateful, but also thought he didn't need to try so hard. He thanked me for simply making dinner after his long work days. I felt blessed to have such a wonderful husband. But after a year of peaceful marriage, things started to change. One night, as we got into bed, James casually asked, "Why can't we have kids?" His tone was slightly irritated, which surprised me. I had also thought about having children, but we weren't actively trying. Given our regular marital life, I believed it would happen in time. I tried to reassure James, saying, "It's just bad timing. We've only been married a year, so it's not something to worry about yet." I definitely wanted children, but I knew rushing wouldn't help. James seemed more forceful than usual, even quoting statistics like 60% chance of conceiving within a year for couples not using contraception. Not being familiar with pregnancy statistics, that number seemed incredibly high to me. James was eager for kids and suggested we get tested together to identify and address any clear issues. I suggested we both get fertility tests, but James's response surprised me. He said, "What are you talking about? Are you saying it's my fault? Infertility is usually the woman's fault. There's no point in me getting tested." His tone was disrespectful, which shocked me. I hadn't accused him of anything. I simply suggested testing since we didn't know where the issue was yet. James assumed I was blaming him and added, "It's definitely the woman's fault," as if I was the problem. I wanted to say more, but I was shaking and could barely reply. James said, "Just you get tested. I'm too busy with work." He insulted me, saying, "You're just a placeholder office lady, right? Just coasting along in a company thanks to your dad's connections." I do a lot of administrative work now, but I'm also learning management skills from my father for when I take over the company. I'm constantly trying to prove myself, and it's tough dealing with the higher-ups. James just doesn't understand my struggles. That night, it seemed pointless to argue with him. Any word I said was met with sharp replies. We went to sleep back to back, and the atmosphere was heavy. From that day, James's attitude towards me completely changed. One evening, after a late talk with my father about the future, I came home to find James berating me for not having dinner ready. I apologized, explaining that I had just gotten home and would start cooking. James muttered, "That's typical of a small company boss's daughter." He didn't know, but my father's real estate company was not small at all, with hundreds of employees. But I knew arguing this point was meaningless. "I'll cook right away. Have a drink and wait," I told James. He loved his alcohol. It seemed to calm him down. Relying on alcohol to maintain our relationship made me sad. I hated being scolded by him. If alcohol could make him feel better even a bit, then it was worth it. The next morning, James's mood hadn't improved. "Make sure dinner's ready when I get home," he spat as he left. I sighed, thinking about my plans for the day. I had taken the day off to visit the gynecologist for fertility testing, as previously mentioned by James. Although I was the one who initially suggested the testing, the fact that only I was undergoing it while James refused was something I found hard to accept. But complaining wouldn't change anything. If the issue was with me, I needed to start infertility treatment promptly. James had been wanting kids, and I too hoped for a child soon. I knew fertility rates differ between the 30s and 40s, so sooner was better for treatment. The clinic was busier than expected, and I was called in for examination an hour after registration. After undergoing a physical examination and blood tests, I was told that the results would be available during my next visit. It would be a shock if the issue was with me, but I was prepared for any necessary steps, no matter the outcome. I resolved not to lose heart. I went for the fertility test today. I told James when he came home from work, Figures. If the problem's with you, testing's the right thing to do. Let me know the results as soon as you get them," he replied. James's belief that I was the cause of our infertility frustrated me. The fertility testing required much time and effort. A bit of understanding from him would have been welcome. 6 years passed, and I turned 37. Though we continued our efforts to conceive, we remained childless, and James seemed to have given up on having a child with me. His late nights increased, and sometimes he didn't come home at all. When asked, he said he was out drinking with colleagues, then singing karaoke till morning. His behavior was more akin to a college student's, deeply exasperating me. My work had become busier, and the thought of starting a family was pushed aside. But James's recent actions were too much. His lack of concern for our home life was clear. One day, after James went out on his day off, I noticed he left his smartphone in the living room. He forgot to take it with him, so I picked it up to take it to his room. His phone rang, showing the name Sandra on the caller ID. Assuming it was a work contact, I answered to inform them that James had forgotten his phone at home. "Hey James, you're late. I've been waiting for 50 minutes. Where are you?" "If you don't hurry, we'll miss the park opening," said a flirty voice on the phone. The word date made me catch my breath. I quickly ended the call. Who was this woman? She mentioned a date, so she likely wasn't a colleague. He's cheating on me, I realized, holding undeniable proof of James's infidelity. I clenched his phone tightly. Sandra had said it was a long-awaited date, indicating a long-term affair. I trembled with indescribable anger. While I was struggling with infertility, James was carelessly cheating on me. His recent distance now made sense. He no longer needed me. Unforgivable. Determined to make James pay, I started collecting evidence of his infidelity. It wasn't hard to gather proof. First, I easily unlocked his smartphone using his birth date. The call history was filled with Sandra's name. When I opened the messaging app, I found numerous messages between James and Sandra, filled with embarrassingly affectionate words that made me feel nauseated. I took photos of this evidence with my phone. After placing James's phone back in his room, I spent the day as if nothing happened. After a month of a strange marriage, my father, the company president, summoned me to his office. "I have something important to discuss with you," he said gravely. Shocked by his words, I couldn't believe what I heard. "Is that true?" I asked. "Yes, so I'm counting on you," he replied. Disturbed, I returned to my office, barely concentrating on work. That evening, James suggested we separate. Having found evidence of his affair, I had been contemplating when to bring up divorce, but him initiating it saved me the hassle. "Yes, let's divorce," I said. James seemed surprised. Perhaps he was happy about being able to be with his mistress, a woman named Sandra. His face was filled with an unmistakable joy that I found irritating. Despite my irritation with James's expression, I signed the divorce papers he offered. "I can file these tomorrow." "I'll be leaving this house," he said. "Okay, are you sure about the mortgage?" I asked casually. "Oh yes, I'm fine," James replied. James's job was demanding but not high-paying. I doubted he could handle a mortgage alone. But since he initiated the divorce and was the one cheating, I felt no obligation to help. I packed and left the house 3 days later, moving back to my parents' house nearby. My parents initially seemed concerned when I told them about my divorce, but when I explained that James had cheated on me, they became furious. They repeatedly reassured me that it was the right decision to part ways with such a man. I threw myself into work, trying to forget about James. Before I realized it, a year had flown by. I was so engrossed in my work that I lost sight of everything else. One day, while relaxing in the living room, my dad approached me. "Why don't you take a break and go on a trip? It's going to get busy starting next month," he said. I guess he thought I'd been working too hard and needed a distraction. Indeed, I had been overwhelmed with various things lately and felt mentally exhausted. Thinking a little trip wouldn't hurt, I took up Dad's suggestion and decided to travel to the Northeast. It was my first solo trip, and I was both nervous and excited. The air in the Northeast was crisp and seemed to cleanse my weary soul. Interacting with the locals who helped me navigate and chatting with the owner of a bar, I found everyone to be incredibly kind, which gradually healed my spirit. I had booked a hotel in Portland, the most famous and largest around here, thinking, why not enjoy the trip to the fullest? After checking in, I relaxed in the lobby with a welcome drink. The fatigue from the journey seemed to melt away. Feeling utterly comfortable, I jokingly considered moving to Portland. A familiar voice called out, "Hey, what are you doing here?" I turned around, startled by the unmistakable voice of my ex-husband, James, who was entering the lobby with 2 large suitcases and a young woman. She appeared to be in her early 20s, with flawless skin, bold makeup, and striking red nails. Despite the chilly northeast weather, she was wearing a short skirt with bare legs. Startled, I stared at James and the woman. "Why are you here, and who is she?" I blurted out, even though I didn't really want to know. "Oh, let me introduce you. This is Sandra, my new wife. We're on our honeymoon. Guess what? She's a wealthy businessman's daughter, James said, his tone full of happiness. He volunteered information I hadn't asked for, but Sandra was the name of the person on the phone. Disgusted that he was with such a young girl, I felt a surge of discomfort. "You're on a solo trip here? That's pathetic," James sneered, despite being the one who cheated and initiated our divorce. Sandra, too, was looking at me, her eyes narrowed with amusement. "Hey James, is this your ex-wife? She looks old." "Hurry up with the check-in," she said in a catty tone. I glared at Sandra, and James, nonchalantly wrapping an arm around her waist, responded, "Yeah, I'm set for life, marrying into money. You can keep struggling in your poor life." James smirked condescendingly, throwing demeaning words my way. His high-pitched voice echoed through the hotel lobby, disrupting the elegant atmosphere I was enjoying and leaving me feeling upset. But his mention of marrying a businessman's daughter made me wonder where he had met someone like that. "Yeah, Sandra is the daughter of Richard Enterprises," James proudly exclaimed. I thought it sounded familiar somehow. "Oh right, that company," I said after a moment, recalling what Richard Enterprises was. James's face lit up with pride. "Impressive, huh?" he exclaimed. But inside, I was holding back laughter. "Come on, you know this company. Her family's loaded, and they even paid off the mortgage on that house quickly." "Thanks for divorcing me so easily, Linda," James said sarcastically, but it didn't bother me at all. "Yeah, I know them. They're in the biggest building downtown, right? I've seen it and even been there," I replied calmly. "Oh, you've been there?" James seemed surprised. "It's quick then. Her family owns a huge company, so they're loaded." "Breaking up with you was the right choice," James smirked nastily, but I simply nodded, still calm. "That building, it's part of our real estate holdings," I mentioned casually, as if I just remembered. James and Sandra both asked in unison, "What do you mean by our real estate?" "That building is rented by my father for his most prestigious office. I don't know if your company is involved in real estate, but it's not a shabby building," I explained. Both seemed skeptical of my words. I hesitated for a moment, but there was no turning back now. Telling James about my company wasn't my concern anymore, now that we were divorced and his pride was no longer my concern. "Yes, I know how grand it is. I was there when my father bought that building. It was about $400 million, I think. But recently, Dad was complaining about a tenant not paying their rent. Turns out it was your company. In fact, my father is a real estate magnate with assets worth $5.3 billion. The building Richard Enterprises is in is one of them. The tenants of the building change regularly, but currently it's Richard Enterprises. For the past few months, they hadn't paid their rent, and that's what was troubling my father," I explained. Sandra looked shocked, but then she burst out laughing. "That can't be true. Our company's doing great. We can surely pay the rent. I'm not falling for such a lame lie to drive a wedge between James and me," she said in a shrill voice. I let out a deep sigh. It seemed like a reasonable conversation with this woman was impossible. Pulling out my smartphone, I decided to call my dad. "Dad, I'm here with the daughter of Richard Enterprises. Can you send me a photo of the reminder notice for the rent?" I quickly relayed my request, and Dad sent a photo of the rent reminder notice for Richard Enterprises. Showing it to James and Sandra, I doubted they could suspect it was a fake, given the speed. "See, you can tell, right? 4 months of unpaid rent. If you don't pay soon, we might have to sue." "What are you going to do?" At the mention of a lawsuit, James and Sandra's faces turned pale. "Come to think of it, Dad has been really on edge lately, yelling about sales and firing a lot of employees," Sandra mumbled, sounding unsure. Seeing her, James shouted in despair, "Lies. You're just trying to trick us and tear Sandra and me apart, aren't you? You're still that kind of person, trying to get back at me for remarrying. Your tactics are dirty." Startled by James's loud voice, I took a step back. "Dirty tactics, huh? I recalled all the heartless words James had hurled at me during our marriage. Then I readied myself, determined to confront James, who was now gloating about marrying Sandra, a wealthy businessman's daughter. I readied myself to tell him the truth. "What are you even saying? Do you really think I still have feelings for you? How foolish. I've long been fed up with a man like you. In fact, I've been feeling sorry for Sandra, who got caught up with you. Did you marry her just for her money? You married me for shallow reasons too, like wanting to get married quickly or wanting kids. And who was it that left me when he found out we couldn't have kids? Who insulted me, calling me useless for being infertile? You're to blame for all of it, yet you think I still like you? You must be out of your mind," I said, feeling a wave of relief as I unleashed my pent-up frustrations on James. James, on the other hand, seemed infuriated, trembling with anger. "You're just an arrogant old hag. You probably can't even get married or have kids anymore. Sandra and I were planning to have fun making a baby after this trip, and now you're accusing Richard Enterprises of not paying rent." Panicked upon realizing the poor performance of Richard Enterprises, James was desperate to blame all his misfortunes on me. I decided to deliver the final blow to James, saying, "Oh, I didn't mention it, but I'm 6 months pregnant. I'm in the stable phase of my pregnancy, so Dad suggested I take this trip to relax. Of course, I have my doctor's permission." That's right. After divorcing James, I found a new love. He was my boss at work, a subordinate of my father. He supported me mentally when I was struggling and encouraged me. He also supported me fully at work and was in favor of me becoming the next CEO. I found out I was pregnant with his child just 4 months ago. Knowing about the baby, I immediately married him. It was a quick marriage, but the company celebrated it grandly. My pregnancy was going smoothly, and encouraged by my father and husband, I embarked on this trip. Just before breaking up with James, my father had told me he was retiring as CEO next month. He decided to retire after being diagnosed with diabetes and thinking it was time to step down. Therefore, I would inherit my father's assets. This made it easier for me to accept the divorce from James. Even without James, I knew I could live a full life. The word pregnant slipped effortlessly from my lips, leaving James shouting, "What? You're pregnant? So were you using birth control when we were married? What's going on?" James stomped his feet in complete confusion. "Birth control? I never did that. Remember, I told you I had infertility tests at the clinic, and they found no issues. So the problem was with you," I told James bluntly. His face twisted visibly. "Does that mean Sandra and I can't have kids? Why did I divorce you and marry Sandra?" James muttered to himself, shoulders slumped in defeat. "What do you mean, why? I feel betrayed knowing you're infertile," Sandra snapped, angry at James's selfish reasoning. Realizing I couldn't bother with them anymore, I said my final words. "That's why from now on, please don't involve yourself with me and Sandra. I have nothing more to say regarding the rent for Richard Enterprises. I will back down until it's fully paid. If you plan to continue renting that building, please pay the overdue rent soon. Otherwise, we'll have to take legal action. I have nothing more to say to you two, so goodbye." I left James and Sandra arguing and confidently walked back to my hotel room. After returning from my trip, my husband greeted me with a smile, saying, "Welcome back. Sorry I couldn't help around the house. Was everything okay?" "Of course, it was fine. I'm glad you got to relax," I replied. "Thank you." My husband smiled warmly at me, and I felt a great sense of relief. Since marrying my current husband, I've been reassured every day, completely forgetting about James. Since that trip, I haven't met James. The following is what I heard through my father's contacts. After that incident, James and Sandra's fights became incessant. Despite thinking he was marrying a wealthy heiress, James discovered Richard Enterprises was in deep debt. Coincidentally, news was all over TV about a Richard Enterprises employee embezzling millions of dollars from clients. Sandra's father knew about the fraud, but tried to cover it up for the company's reputation. However, once the scandal became public, Richard Enterprises' stock plummeted. Having lost its credibility, the company saw a mass exodus of employees. In such a state, they couldn't possibly pay the rent, so my father was taking legal action against Richard Enterprises. The future of the company looked bleak, as it was entirely Richard Enterprises' fault. James, having lost a fortune he thought was within his grasp, was furiously blaming everyone but himself. Thinking he could ride on the coattails of a wealthy heiress was overly optimistic of James. Sandra, realizing James was infertile, accused him of marriage fraud. After our hotel encounter, I had a lawyer demand compensation from James for his infidelity, leaving both him and Sandra in debt. I heard that James and Sandra ended up arguing every time they saw each other, and they finally got divorced recently. Then, unbelievably, James called me after divorcing Sandra. "Linda, please marry me again. I have debts other than the alimony." Sandra made me buy everything she wanted and then left without paying a dime. "You're the only one I can rely on. I'll do anything for you. Please forgive me." James's pleas sounded like a beggar, so pitiful that they almost made me sick. His unchanged attitude of marrying for money was just appalling. "No, I have no desire to be involved with you ever again. I'm going to be happy with my husband and our child, so please don't contact me again. Goodbye," I said calmly, and then immediately had his phone number blocked. That should stop any more absurd calls from James. Having lost his wife and money, James will likely live a lonely life now. Given his infertility, remarriage might be difficult for him. Moreover, it's hard to imagine someone falling for a person like James, who mocks others so readily. All I could think was that he should at least try to repay his debts. I thought about it as if it were someone else's problem. As for me, I'm looking forward to my life with my husband and our soon-to-arrive baby. Both my work and personal life are more fulfilling than ever, and I'm savoring this unparalleled happiness. My name is Emma, and I'm a 20-year-old university student living in New York. I grew up in a family that went through its share of changes. My parents got divorced when I was 14, and I've lived with my mom ever since. Things got even tougher last year when my dad, who I was very close to, passed away from cancer. He left me a significant amount of money in his will, but I could only access it when I turned 20. This year, I reached that milestone, and not long after, something pretty unbelievable happened. One afternoon, my stepdad, Justin, who is in his mid-30s and has been married to my mom for the last 6 years, asked to talk to me. Our relationship has always been a bit strained. I try to keep things peaceful, but he's not always been the kindest to me. He started the conversation with a heavy topic. He suggested that I give the money my dad left me to my stepbrother, Michael, to help with his college expenses. According to Justin, Michael needed the money more for his education, and it seemed only fair to him that I help out. I was taken aback by his request. The idea of giving away the money my dad left for me felt wrong. I tried to explain to Justin that this inheritance was something my dad intended for me, and it felt important to keep it for my future. But Justin didn't see my point of view. He insisted that I didn't need the money and that Michael's needs were greater. Despite his pressure, I stood my ground. I calmly explained to Justin that saying no wasn't about disrespect. It was about honoring my dad's wishes and maintaining personal boundaries. Justin got quite upset at my refusal and tried to intimidate me, but I remained firm in my decision. It was a challenging conversation, but it was important for me to speak up for what I felt was right. I stood firm, making it clear that if Justin was upset by my refusal, he might want to reconsider his approach. "Justin, remember, you're part of this household too, so let's try to keep things respectful," I suggested. but it seemed like a peaceful resolution wasn't in the cards. I ended the conversation there, leaving before he had the chance to respond. Justin's reaction wasn't a shock to me. Given his past behavior, I had a hunch he might try to claim the inheritance money for himself at some point. You might wonder about my mom's role in all of this. Well, that's a complex issue. My mom, for reasons I can't fully understand, always seems to overlook Justin's negative traits. She's deeply in love with him, almost to the point of blindness, and I didn't want to shatter her perception by constantly clashing with Justin. So I've tried to maintain peace for her sake. It's odd, considering I'm one of the youngest in the house, yet often I find myself having to be the most responsible. At the time of this ordeal, my mom, Mary, was out of town, which is why she wasn't around to intervene. Had she been there, she would have been livid. Justin knew he had a window of opportunity with her away, underestimating my resolve in the process. As I walked away from our heated discussion, Justin followed, berating me and labeling me a terrible sister for not wanting to hand over the inheritance to Michael. But it wasn't about not wanting to help, it was about the principle of the matter. Justin and Michael, unfortunately, seemed to follow the like father, like son trope, acting more like schemers from a cartoon than family members. Their antics could remind someone of the characters Pinky and the Brain, with their roles in this scenario up for debate. As I tried to leave the argument behind, Justin wasn't done. He insisted I listen and comply with his demands, bringing Michael into the conversation to reinforce his point. Michael sleepily joined in, confused about the details until Justin prompted him about the important reason behind their demand for the money, a supposed business venture that suddenly became about Michael's university tuition. Their story was inconsistent, with Justin scrambling to justify their claim to my inheritance, first mentioning a business, then switching to tuition. It was clear their motives were murky at best, relying on manipulation rather than any real need or right to the money my dad left me. I just woke up, so I'm a bit foggy, Michael mumbled, trying to piece together his story. Right, the university. I've been thinking about going, and I need the money for that. So yeah, I need it. His attempt to claim the inheritance for his education was unconvincing at best. I couldn't help but respond with a firm no, prompting a flurry of protests from both him and Justin. Why not, Emma? He's clear about what he wants, Justin pressed, insisting the matter was non-negotiable and that they were entitled to the money. We'll just have to see about that, I replied, the air growing thick with tension. Justin's antics were usually limited to harmless pranks, but this new scheme to manipulate me out of my inheritance marked a departure into outright selfishness and immaturity. I decided to hold off on telling my mom for the time being, preferring to handle the situation on my own, especially after uncovering more about their dubious intentions. Emma, stop being childish. It's time to act like an adult and do what's right, Justin lectured, suggesting that the adult thing to do was to hand over my inheritance. His logic was baffling. And what, Justin? The right thing is to give away my inheritance on your say-so? I countered. His plea to keep this from my mom raised my suspicions further. Why shouldn't I tell her? She has every right to know what's happening in her own house. Justin's desperation not to involve my mom, paired with his uncharacteristically stern tone, only fueled my resolve. Something was definitely amiss, particularly with the so-called business venture Michael had mentioned earlier. It was clear they underestimated my awareness of their tactics, and Justin's vehement opposition to me sharing anything with my mom was a red flag. I reached out to my mom at the first opportunity. Hey mom, how's everything with you? I began, trying to gauge her mood. I'm all right, dear. What about you? She responded. I hesitated, knowing what I was about to divulge could cause a stir. Not great, Mom. Something's up with Justin and Michael Justin in particular. He's been acting really strange. My mom's response was to caution me against overthinking things. Oh, Emma, don't let your imagination get the better of you. but it was too late for reassurances. The pieces were too aligned, pointing to something more than just a misunderstanding or paranoia on my part. Understanding my mom's reluctance to believe the unsettling truth about Justin, I pressed on, determined to shed light on the situation. "Mom, I get that you have feelings for him, but Justin crossed a line. He didn't just ask for the inheritance money, he demanded it for Michael, claiming it was for education purposes. There's something off about this whole thing, and he even became aggressive when I mentioned bringing it up to you," I explained, my resolve hardening despite her skepticism. My mom hesitated, torn by her emotions and the troubling accusations against the man she cared for. "I'm struggling to grasp this, Emma. I feel like we need more evidence to make sense of it all." "Don't worry, Mom. I'll find the proof we need," I assured her, even though she wasn't entirely convinced. The idea that Justin had somehow bewitched her with his manipulations nagged at me, but I knew I needed solid evidence to reveal the true nature of his intentions. Later that night, I found myself scouring the family computer for any clues that could unravel the mystery of Justin's behavior. Fortune seemed to be on my side when I discovered that Justin had carelessly left his email account open. What I found was a revelation. Emails exchanged between Justin and a woman named Martha painted a clear picture of deceit. These messages were far from innocent, hinting strongly at an affair. But it was the content discussing plans for a divorce and a future together, fueled by an influx of money from a dubious business venture, that caught my attention. Justin may have been cautious not to detail any illegal activities, but his indiscretion and betrayal were blatant. Armed with this information and determined to uncover more, I decided to approach Michael, hoping he might inadvertently reveal more about their plans. I initiated a casual conversation with him, subtly turning on my phone's recorder to capture our exchange. "Hey, Michael," I greeted him, feigning cheerfulness. "Hello, Emma," he replied, seemingly in a good mood. "You seem happy today." "Why not? It's a beautiful day," I said, steering the conversation in hopes of discovering more about Justin's schemes and their impact on my family. I approached Michael with a sense of curiosity, pretending to consider their request for the inheritance money. "I've been thinking a lot about what you and Justin mentioned. I'm actually considering giving you the money for your college," I told him, watching his reaction closely. "Really? That's amazing. I'll let him know right away," Michael said, his excitement palpable. "Hold on, not so quickly. Before anything happens, I need to confirm something. This money is specifically for your college tuition, correct?" I pressed on, trying to gauge his sincerity. "Yes, of course, for my college tuition," Michael stuttered a bit, perhaps caught off guard by my questioning. "And you're sure about this? What about Martha? Is she serious about it too?" I prodded, dropping the name I had discovered in Justin's emails. "Martha? Who's Martha?" Michael faltered, a clear sign of confusion crossing his face. "Oh, she's a student advisor at the college," he quickly covered up, but it was too late. Unbeknownst to us, Justin had silently entered the room, and his presence was intimidating. "I don't appreciate you questioning my son like this," he interjected, his tone stern. "I was merely inquiring about the intended use of my inheritance. After all, if I'm considering giving it away, I'd like to know it's for a good reason," I explained, trying to maintain my composure. Justin's retort was sharp. "Once you give money away, it's no longer yours to worry about. It's not your business anymore." The audacity of his statement took me aback, especially considering his next threat. "You're not just thinking about giving us the money. You will give it to us, or you'll find yourself out of this house." Michael looked as shocked as I felt by his father's escalation. "Dad, this isn't what we agreed on," he began, only to be cut off by Justin asserting his authority in a domineering tone, threatening my place in the home if I didn't comply with his demands. Choosing silence as my response, I retreated to my room, all the while recording the entire confrontation. Justin was unaware that his true colors were being captured for posterity. Once safe in my room, I began compiling all the evidence I had against him. It felt like I was a detective in one of those crime shows, piecing together the puzzle. I had audio recordings and email screenshots, all pointing to Justin's deceitful behavior and his affair with Martha. Feeling the weight of my findings, I decided it was time to bring my mom into the loop. "Hello, Mom," I started, my voice laced with urgency. "Hey, sweetheart, how are you?" she responded, unaware of the storm brewing. "Mom, are you sitting down? I have something important to tell you, and it's not easy," I said, preparing her for the revelations that were to come. Breaking the news to my mom was tough. I started by telling her about the unsettling discoveries I had made. Initially, she found it hard to believe, but when I played the audio recording of my conversation with Justin, her denial began to fade, replaced by a mixture of shock and heartbreak. "Why would you do such things? Why be so cruel?" she questioned, her voice breaking with every word. "It's hard to say, but we're dealing with someone who doesn't have our best interests at heart," I replied gently, trying to be as supportive as I could despite the harsh reality. "I hate to say it, but he's not the person we thought he was." Hearing the truth straight from the recording was a turning point for her. "This is unacceptable. I can't believe I wasn't here to protect you from them," she said, determination taking over her initial shock. "Stay put. I'm coming back immediately, and yes, I've locked my door," I reassured her. My mom's protective instincts kicked in full force. She was ready to confront Justin and ensure he regretted his actions. "He's going to realize he picked the wrong family to mess with," she said, a fierce resolve in her voice. When she arrived, it was a moment filled with mixed emotions. We hugged tightly, sharing tears over the betrayal and the tough decisions that lay ahead. Yet, there was also a sense of relief and unity. Together, we spent hours devising a plan, ready to face the ordeal as a team. In the days that followed, Justin was perplexed by my mom's unexpected return and her cold demeanor towards him. He tried to play it off with a veneer of cheerfulness, likely hoping to charm his way out of any suspicions. But my mom was unmoved. She saw right through his act and was gearing up to take decisive action. Concerned about the true nature of Justin's business and the potential misuse of the inheritance, my mom decided it was time to bring in professional help. She hired a private investigator to dig deeper into Justin's activities and the mysterious emails. The thought of him planning to misuse the money for unethical purposes infuriated her further, and she was adamant about protecting us from his deceit. The private investigator's findings confirmed our worst fears and shed new light on Justin's scheming. My mom briefed me on the details, and together, we prepared for the next steps. It was clear that this was more than just a family dispute. It was about standing up against manipulation and ensuring justice was served. In that moment, the atmosphere in the room was charged with tension, a palpable mix of disbelief and resolve hanging between us. Justin's usual confidence seemed to falter under the weight of our accusations, his eyes darting from the camera to my mom, then to me, as if searching for some escape or loophole in our confrontation. "You can't possibly understand what you're talking about. This is ridiculous," Justin tried to deflect, but his voice lacked its usual assertiveness. It was clear the tables had turned, and the power he once wielded so effortlessly was slipping through his fingers. Michael, caught in the middle of this familial storm, looked from his father to us, his expression a mix of confusion and realization. Perhaps for the first time, he began to see the man he called father for who he truly was, a revelation that seemed to shake him to his core. My mom, with a steely gaze fixed on Justin, stepped forward. "Not only do we understand, but we have proof. Emails, recordings. You've been planning to launder money through a laundromat, all the while involving yourself with a known criminal. Martha's record speaks volumes, and your plans for this business are clear as day." Justin's attempts to maintain any semblance of innocence were crumbling fast. "You have no idea what you're getting into. This is my business, my life. You can't just barge in and—" "But we can, and we are," I interjected, bolstering my mom's stance. "This isn't just about your business, Justin. This is about our lives, our safety. You've brought danger and illegality into our home, and we won't stand by and watch you destroy everything for your selfish gains." The evidence was indisputable. The audio recordings of Justin's and Michael's conversations, the emails outlining their plans, and now their caught-in-the-act admissions made it impossible for Justin to deny any longer. The camera in my hands, still rolling, captured every word, every denial, and every excuse, ensuring there was no way out for him. "You think you're clever, recording this, gathering evidence?" Justin sneered, his composure cracking further. "You may think you've won, but—" "We don't think we've won, Justin. We know we have," my mom cut him off, her voice firm and unwavering. "What you've done is not only morally reprehensible but illegal. You've endangered this family, exploited my trust, and now you're going to face the consequences of your actions." As the confrontation reached its climax, Michael finally spoke up, his voice barely above a whisper. "Dad, how could you?" It was a question loaded with betrayal and disillusionment, aimed at the man he had looked up to. The room fell silent for a moment, the gravity of the situation settling in. Justin, now devoid of his usual bravado, seemed to shrink before us. It was clear the game was over. My mom's next steps were clear legal action, separation, and ensuring the safety and security of our family. As we left Justin to contemplate the ruin of his own making, my mom and I knew the road ahead would be difficult. But with the truth on our side and the evidence in hand, we were ready to face whatever came next, together. The veil had indeed been lifted, and in its place, a newfound strength and unity emerged between us, ready to rebuild and move forward from the shadows of deceit. "I'm clueless about what you're hinting at. Why don't we call Martha? Maybe she can shed some light on this, huh?" Justin tried to deflect, with a tone that barely masked his panic. "You two think you've got it all figured out. Martha is just a friend," he added, but the confidence he attempted to project was waning rapidly. "The compromising pictures we found tell a different story," I countered, my voice steady despite the tumult of emotions inside me. "And seriously, who uses email for affairs these days? It's absurdly reckless." Justin, now visibly flustered, shot back, "You went through my personal stuff. That's outrageous." "No, Justin. What's outrageous is you," my mom interjected, her voice rising in indignation. "How dare you repeatedly threaten my daughter over money that rightfully belongs to her? How dare you use threats to attempt to evict her from her own home? Your actions are indefensible. How dare you involve your son in your reckless plans, putting him at risk? And your audacity to plan using that money for illegal ventures is beyond forgiveness. Now, when it's time to account for your actions, you suddenly fall silent?" She continued, her words cutting through the air like a blade. Justin, cornered and desperate, spat out, "Get that camera out of my face," as he lunged towards me in a blind rage. I dodged his attempt swiftly, his aggressive move only adding to the gravity of his unraveling. "You're thinking of attacking my daughter now? Do you have any idea how much trouble you're in?" my mom exclaimed, her tone a mix of disbelief and anger. Justin, defiant to the end, sneered, "You think you understand the situation? You know nothing." "Well, let's see if the police agree with you. They should be arriving any minute now," I declared, watching closely for his reaction. "Police? You wouldn't dare," he blustered, but his bravado was crumbling. As the sound of police sirens grew closer, Justin's usual smugness disappeared, replaced by a look of sheer terror. It was the first time I'd seen him stripped of his arrogance, revealing the coward beneath. "Please, Mary, let's not escalate this. I can explain," he pleaded, his voice cracking under the strain. "Save your explanations for the judge, you despicable man," my mom retorted with a disgust that left no room for ambiguity. "And Michael, don't think you're absolved from responsibility. You're both going to face the consequences of your actions." As the police arrived, it was clear that this was the beginning of the end for Justin's schemes. My mom's fierce declaration echoed in the air, marking a pivotal moment of justice for us. "This should teach you a lesson about disrespecting my daughter and me. You're not too young to understand the difference between right and wrong, and it's time for you to face the consequences," my mom asserted, her tone firm but fair. "Yes, Mom, I understand," I replied, knowing that I had crossed a line and needed to accept the repercussions of my actions. "Come on, Grace, don't you think this is all a bit too extreme?" Justin tried to argue, seeking some leniency. "Quite the opposite. This is barely scratching the surface of what's deserved," my mom countered, her resolve unwavering. "Emma, how's our live stream doing?" my mom inquired, a modern twist to ensuring that justice was seen to be done. "We've got over 5,000 viewers tuning in. This is making waves," I informed her, amazed at the digital audience we had attracted. "And just to make things perfectly clear," my mom turned towards Justin, her voice steady and clear, "I want a divorce." "Yes, you heard it right, folks," she announced, making sure the live stream caught every word. The fallout from the live stream was monumental. The drama unfolded in real time for over 5,000 witnesses, and the story quickly spread to local newspapers and tabloids. Being at the center of this whirlwind was surreal, witnessing the swift downfall of Justin, my soon-to-be ex-stepfather, and the complicit Michael. The satisfaction of seeing justice served was palpable. Justin's world unraveled as he lost his job, friends, and even the support of some family members who chose to distance themselves. Facing serious charges, Justin's future hung in the balance, with the potential of spending up to 22 years behind bars if the court found him guilty. Meanwhile, Martha, his partner in crime, was also discovered by the police after attempting to lay low during the scandal. She too faced similar charges, her future uncertain. Through the turmoil, my mom and I found strength in each other. Our bond deepened as we navigated through the chaos, coming out stronger on the other side. Weekends were now our time to unwind on the patio, drinks in hand, reflecting on the absurdity and malevolence of Justin's actions. It was a period of healing and reaffirmation for us both. Good riddance, we toast, a shared sentiment of relief and closure. Good riddance, indeed.